And anybody has a declaration can declare pecuniary interest if they have it, or later on if it comes up during any conversations. At 10 o'clock, we have a delegation from Amy McKinnon, Executive Director, Owen Sound Regional Hospital Foundation, and Dr. Colin McIver, Medical Imaging, Grey Bruce Health Services, with regard to the MRI fundraising for Grey Bruce Health Service. Everybody here? Can we nudge the clock ahead? Okay. Lance, thank you for coming this morning. Nice to see your smiling face. Okay, do you want to come up for your presentation? Thank you. Welcome to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you, Warden and members of the council, for having us here this morning. My name's Amy McKinnon. I'm the Executive Director of the Owen Sound Regional Hospital Foundation. And today I'm here representing not only the Owen Sound Regional Hospital Foundation, but the 5 foundations that raise money for Grey Bruce Health Services. With me today is Dr. Colin McIver. He's the Chief of Medical Imaging at Grey Bruce Health Services. And as you mentioned, Lance Thurston is also here, who's our President and CEO, so he's back here with us today. Before we get into the MRI, we just wanted to thank Grey County for their $1 million in support. We received the last payment of $200,000 this past June. You had been paying $200,000 a year for the past 5 years, and we thank you. You'll see some of the highlights noted on the slide of what we were able to accomplish with the $11.4 million that we raised in the community. We can't thank you enough for your contribution. It definitely made a difference in how we are able to offer health care in our community. The 5 foundations of GBHS now are working together on purchasing a new MRI system, which is an essential service for our community. And I'm going to pass it on to Dr. McIver to explain this service to you.
Good morning, Warden and members of council. Thank you very much for giving us time this morning. So I graduated from University of Toronto in 1985 and came up here to start a radiology practice. I was the 3rd person in. MRI services were just getting rolling in Toronto in 1985, 1986. We waited until 2004 before we were fortunate enough to get MRI services up here. So there's a ring of MRI units well to the south of us: Toronto, Hamilton, Guelph, Kitchener-Waterloo, London, Windsor. But we are the only MRI service north of that. MRI was launched here in 2004 after a very successful fundraising campaign, and the County of Grey donated $1 million to that effort, and we're very grateful for that. The current program, we think, is highly successful. We're currently imaging 11,000 plus patients per year from County of Grey, County of Bruce, a fair number of patients from the Collingwood area as well, and from well south of us. We have a full range of MRI services available here, and we have a very good machine that's been in operation since 2004. We have relatively short wait times here. Our wait times for an elective MR are about 28 days. That compares very favorably with Barrie, which has a wait time of 99 days for an elective MR. MR has been a very important asset to the hospital here because it's allowed us to continue recruitment of specialist physicians. So everybody who graduates now from medicine, particularly in a medical specialty or surgical specialty, has come to depend on MRI as part of their armamentarium of imaging services for the workup of their patients. And without MRI services here, we would have been unable to recruit the 61 specialists that have joined our medical staff since 2004. So it's become a really integral part of the armamentarium diagnostic imaging here, and we think it's an essential service now. We will be unable to attract further medical specialists in the future without the ability to maintain MRI services. So a little bit about MRI. So MRI does not use ionizing radiation like CT or X-rays. It currently is a fairly fast test, 20 to 30 minutes for most patients. It's non-invasive. It's widely used in medical and surgical practice now. There's a heavy use by orthopedics and neurology. It's really the best way to image the brain and spinal cord, has significant advantages over CT. It's also heavily used in our oncology practice, particularly for staging patients and looking for response to treatment. It has key applicability in stroke, and it has widening applicability for heart disease. And we use it for virtually every aspect of medical and surgical practice. There's an inset image on the right of your slide, and you can see an area of white on the back of the brain. That's in the left hemisphere. That's actually a malignant tumor, and you can see the exquisite contrast separation between the malignant tumor and the normal brain. That's how good MRI imaging is. So we have a 14-year-old machine. It's one of the oldest in Canada. It was made by Siemens. The magnet that Siemens made and put in this machine is one of the best magnets they've ever made. It's very uniform, and it's been very stable. So the magnet's not the problem. It's all the mechanical pieces associated with the machine that are now 14 years old. It's like an old car where the engine block is good, but not much else is on the car. So all the mechanical pieces, particularly the table, which is used to support and move the patients in and out, and the radiofrequency coils, all that stuff is end of life now, and we're having a lot of difficulty in keeping the table active and replacing parts. So this has got to the point now where we are unable to accommodate patients who are 300 pounds or over, and that's a significant problem for us. A lot of patients are heavy, and those patients all have to go south, either to London, Hamilton, Kitchener-Waterloo. And we think that unless we replace the MRI in a relatively timely fashion, there's going to be a catastrophic failure, and we'll be without MRI services completely. So if we get a new MRI machine, it'll allow us to reduce the examination time. It'll allow us to throughput more patients. The image resolution will go up greatly. This is just a factor of technology progression, the way computers have progressed over the last 2 decades. We're going to have enhanced three-dimensional capability for cardiac and prostate and breast imaging, which is very important. The machine will be quieter, it'll be more comfortable, and it'll have a larger capacity for heavy patients. It will also be more energy efficient, and I'll go back to the critical service that the MRI is important for in this location, allowing for the recruitment and retention of specialist physicians.
So you may wonder why we're here today when the council you just held elections, but we understand that budget process still carries on, so we're here today. And it is urgent, as Dr. McKeever mentioned. The team at GBHS has done a tremendous job in extending the lifespan of our MRI. Typically, they last about 10 years. They say that's sort of the serviceable life, so we've extended it for 4 years. Currently, procurement is underway with a vendor of choice. Those negotiations are ongoing and happening as we speak. We are raising $4.7 million for the project. You can see the breakdown there. The estimated cost of the equipment, so the actual magnet and all the things that come around it, is about $2.7 million. The renovations to the space will be about $1.5 million. There is a team working together that's made up of staff from the medical imaging team, from engineering, from patient relations, who are looking at what's our best way to move forward. Will we keep the current MRI as we have it, as long as we can use it for some services while we have the new one? Or do we dismantle the old one and install the new one and rent a portable MRI for that time? We can't have any downtime. We have to have MRI services continue through the process. So that committee is looking at which way we'll go. We don't know the answer to that today for you. So the refurbishment or rental will be about $300,000, and the fundraising expenses of the 5 foundations, we're keeping it fairly lean to $200,000. Sort of this fundraising initiative is kind of the world's worst secret in the community. We are going out public next week, but it is pretty public already. I want to introduce you to Joe DeFries. He has a business in Georgian Bluffs, and he lives in Meaford, and he is a patient of the MRI system, and I'll just let him tell his story.
condition soon so that I could get on the treatments fast. Not allowing what I had to progress was huge in my health today. So I'm very thankful to be able to got in as soon as I was. For me, I work with steel on a regular basis, so I had to have an orbital x-ray done, make sure there was no filings in there, which can lead to problems, obviously. We've got an aging population, and for them to have to travel out of town. Myself, I've been to some out of town MRI appointments, and I got to shut my business down for the day. Depending on when your appointment is, you may be getting in a hotel room. Most people are going to need an MRI at one point or another in their lives, and it can affect people's health so dramatically. I work with tools every day, and to have the best of tools and equipment is huge for any trade, or when you're dealing with somebody's health, having the best tools is paramount. So strongly consider donating what you can. I've been told our MRI machine in town is 14 years old, and let's be honest, you wouldn't use a cell phone that was 14 years old. So we need this equipment to be up to date.
So we are here today to ask council to consider an investment of $400,000 over 2 years. This is in line with what you have been doing for the past five years at $200,000. 50% of the patients who use our regional services, including the MR, are from Grey County. And we'd be happy, with your permission, to come back in June and give you an update on where the status of the MR system. We have all sort of chosen to live in a rural community, and that doesn't mean we don't deserve the best in healthcare. And an MR is an essential service, and we deserve to have that here in our community. Warden, is there time for questions?
Yes. Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. Certainly, we understand the needs of our community. So, Councillor Boddy has a question, or maybe a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Dr. McKeever, you said that the magnet currently is in good shape, so has there been some thought of just rebuilding it, or is that not possible?
No, that's not possible. So part of it has to do with the number of channels of information coming off the magnet, and that's all integrated with it. So we're going to go from a 4-channel communication system to a 32-channel. That's how the speed picks up. And we've looked at that carefully, and it's not possible in the short answer.
Perfect, thank
So
you.
we're not sure. A question was asked last week at another presentation whether or not the unit could be sold. And if we sold it to, say, a northern community or something, they would have the same or greater difficulty maintaining the operability of this machine as we do. And so I don't think the unit has a significant resale value, but it could be broken down for parts if it comes out. And I don't know, Siemens would have to deal with that.
Perfect, thank you very much. Mr. Warden, I understand that this is the second request from a hospital for funding, and that we'll be looking at it in the new year or coming soon, I guess, with the next budget.
Right.
Good, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Councillor McQueen?
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and thank you for your presentation. Certainly, as you just answered about a northern community, but certainly when we get the new MRI, what do you call it, MRI, get my acronyms right. Certainly, I would see the benefit, though, for a northern community that doesn't have any ability to have one, and certainly having the ability to have one, maybe in a sense of versus not having one. Is that still not an advantage to a northern community?
Let me tell you what our optimal scenario would be. If we pull the existing magnet out, it's going to come out for about 3 months. That's how long it's going to take to rebuild the room. We have to build a railway into the hospital on the 4th floor to bring the new magnet in. It's about 4 tons. And so it's a big technical undertaking to install a new magnet. To rent an MRI unit to provide continuity of service during that interval is several $100,000, as Amy said. What we would like to do, if possible, is get permission from the Ministry of Health to build a brand new MR suite beside the existing suite, keep the old magnet running while we install the new one, use the new magnet as the workhorse, and use the old magnet for kind of low-end stuff, like knees, ankles, things like that, but do all the high-end imaging on the new machine. That would be our optimal scenario. We don't know whether we're going to get approval from the Ministry of Health to do this or not.
So would that be something that we could also endorse as the county agree of that idea?
That would be an awesome thing to do.
Because we do have opportunities to meet with ministers at Roma or in AMO to have that. I'm not sure your time frame, but we certainly could have delegations in that sense with the
That would
Ministry
be a
of Health.
wonderful initiative.
So maybe that's something we need to look forward, because certainly having, I know as a farmer, having a tractor, new tractor, and having one in the shed, but sometimes something happens, you still need that old tractor, so that's a good idea.
Thank you for that, Councillor Barfoot.
Thanks, Mr. Warden, and great presentation. You've actually clarified, Dr. McKeever, just in your last response there, some of my questions. I guess a further follow-up, though, is how soon could things come into reality of having the new one put in if the ministry approves what you're suggesting?
Well, depending on ministry approval, we would like to start a construction process soon, early in the new year. We'd like to have the new unit operational by mid-2019, so like June or something, or before if possible.
Thank you for that. Was there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Eccles.
It's not really about the MRI, but the use of the MRI itself, not the purchase. A few years ago, I had a very close family member that had the MRI, ended up having to go for surgery. So I had an MRI here in Owen Sound, went to London, and London had to redo the whole MRI because I don't know why.
Okay, well,
But anyways,
okay.
do we have that ability for a trust in doing an MRI here? And if surgery happens some other place, that we can transfer the knowledge? We've evolved to that level, have we?
So there's a couple of points that I can speak to about that. One is that clinicians in London obviously are most comfortable with, their own staff. And there's a feeling in tertiary healthcare centers, I've seen it in Toronto certainly, where like people who live north of Bloor Street don't know anything about anything, particularly in medicine. And so if they get an imaging study in Toronto, say from Richmond Hill, well, it's obviously no good. Even though the people in Richmond Hill graduated from the same university the year before, it's no good, and it all gets repeated. And that happens in London. A second issue is that clinicians in London are getting patients from all over. When we send them information on a disk or something, it's technically a little bit complex to open it and to manipulate the images the way they manipulate their own images on a PACS system. And sometimes they're just not comfortable enough doing that, and so they just get one of their own studies. The third thing is that London has up-to-date, the best equipment, and they keep it up-to-date. Ours is, as I said, 14 years old. There's not a decay in resolution, but there's an improvement in new imaging technology over old imaging technology. And so that partially explains it. Another initiative that we're undertaking now, it's actually being chaired by Dr. Christian Baldoff, who's one of our MRI fellowship-trained physicians. He's leading an initiative through the Southwest LHIN to standardize imaging protocols, to standardize requisitions, and to standardize indications for MR across the entire LHIN. So we feel that when that process is finished, which should be within a couple of months, that that plus a regional imaging retrieval and archive service will allow physicians anywhere within this LHIN to see a study done anywhere, and the indications and performance of the imaging should be the same wherever they go. And so we think that's going to be a major advantage. If we get a new machine, we're looking at a couple of vendors, but if we get the new machine from our vendor of choice, it'll be as good a machine as anywhere in Canada.
No, that's great. Councillor Fosbrook, you had a question? And then Councillor McKean, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Thank you very much for your presentation. What can you tell us about the long-term financial planning and requirements that you foresee 10, 20 years from now? So we have made an investment. It's 14 years old. You mentioned lifespan. I didn't catch the projected lifespan of this new investment. So bottom line, what would the county be looking at for long-term ongoing investment in this initiative?
So there are standards out there for timeliness of imaging equipment, and it has to do with further development of fast computers and higher resolution and stuff. We have consistently allowed our equipment, or maintained our equipment, and allowed it to exceed the recommended replacement guidelines. In this case, it's over by 40%. And the same thing with CT. We keep our CTs running longer. Our ultrasound machines are now over their recommended life expectancy, but we think we're still able to offer reasonable service. All things being equal, we would anticipate this machine to last at least 10 years. We would hopefully make it last the same length of time as the current machine or longer. But I think we will be looking for new technology sometime within the next decade or decade and a half for MR. In terms of what's out there in the armamentarium of imaging, there isn't much new technology that we're going to be able to access up here. For instance, we'll never get a PET scan up here. And so really imaging has matured to the point now where ultrasound, CT, MRI, and nuclear medicine really contribute about 99% of all available imaging. We have all those modalities here, but they will require replacement for sure. Nuclear medicine is next on our list. That machine is currently 15 years old and past its expected lifetime, but still operating reasonably well.
So from a fundraising perspective, if you're asking when are we going to come back and ask you to fund the MR again, we won't. We're here today to ask you to fund $400,000 for this new MR. Hopefully you'll approve that and we'll be payable over 2 years. You can expect that we will then come back in 2 years to ask you for your support again for another project. The current priorities upcoming for GBHS are for the mental health program. We know that's an essential need in our community. That is highly underfunded, as well as an update and renovations to our surgery suite and what we call MDRD, which is a medical device reprocessing center. So we know those are 2 other projects as well. That's why we thought the MR asking for commitment for 2 years, so then we can come back to the county and talk about some of the other services and priorities that are coming forward.
Thank you very much for that. So if anybody was trying to get a sense of the long-term required investment in healthcare in this region, do you have like a capital budget that goes, 20 years out? How far do you go out? Because you're talking about projects.
There's an expert back there, I think.
Lance will have to answer that question.
Well, I just think it would be very important for us to get the bigger picture, longer term, to chart this out and really get a handle on, the impact of the demographics and all of that. I mean, this is just a piece of it.
This is a big subject. You might want to have Lance come and present to you at some time with a formal presentation, because this is a big issue now. We've got a hospital that's 30 years old and other things. But he's the expert.
We'll receive an informal one today from Lance.
Okay.
A few words from Lance.
I think it would be a great opportunity to come back and provide you with a longer-term picture of our capital and operating needs. They are significant, and it's something that the community needs to know about, and the ministry needs to know about the ongoing pressures that we're facing. Because the funding model is the province does not provide capital dollars. Once they build the hospital, they're out of it, and it's up to the communities. So there's some significant gaps in our funding models that you need to understand, and perhaps through AMO and other organizations, we can put some pressure on the ministry. So
Thank you
Very
be
much.
glad to come back.
for that.
Thank you.
Councillor McKeon?
Yeah, thank you, Warden Holliday, and thanks for the presentation. I guess that sitting here looking at the numbers, if I'm correct, if we were to, your optimum fix for this, I'll use that word, would be to have the new suite built and a new MRI put in, keeping the existing one for your less intrusive. Can we, before, if it was the wish of council to present this to AMO or at one of the ministries, there should be a cost saving with that, because you don't have to rent the new one as you're doing the the new suite. Am I correct in saying
Well,
that?
that's true. We would not have to rent a rental unit, but construction of an MRI suite is a highly technically complex endeavor. First of all, there's significant structural work that has to be done to support a new multi-ton unit that goes in. MRI suites have to be highly radio shielded so that they don't get, because the signal that comes off an MR machine is radio frequency, and the room has to be shielded so you don't get extraneous radio frequency into it. It's an expensive proposition. It's going to be a couple of $100,000 just to build a suite to house the new MR. We think the cost of rental is about equal to the cost of building a new suite.
Okay. Further, I think that would be an important, getting the numbers and presenting the numbers to the politicians at Queen's Park at the provincial level is always a key. And I think that if council was to endorse the idea of having the new suite, new MRI, and keeping the old one, I think that having the good numbers to take down to that presentation would be a key to success.
We can get those numbers for you, estimates. We'll have to have a vendor, we'll have to choose the vendor, and then they will presumably be doing a turnkey, and then they can give us a pretty accurate number, I think, of the cost of a new suite.
Those are good comments, John. The CAO is taking some notes here, and I think that obviously, you know, there is a path forward, and we certainly, I believe, and I want to hear.
Well, thank you very much.
They'll move forward with that. Thank you very much for coming. Yes, oh, sorry, John, I didn't see you in the sun there.
That's fine, Mr. Warden, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Going along with what Councillor McKean has said, can you give us an idea of the usage, the time usage? Are you busy 10 hours a day, 5 days
Oh,
a
no,
week?
we operate the magnet 18 hours a day,
18, okay.
7 days a week, most stat holidays. We would operate it 24 hours a day if we could find staff. So, but we have difficulty finding staff to work graveyard shifts 7 days a week. And so we've kind of settled on an 18-hour-a-day usage pattern, so it's operating till midnight every night. And
I have had a midnight appointment before.
right,
here, so yeah.
right. And when we do have staff sometimes, then we'll expand the service to 24 hours a day, but it's difficult to do that.
Very good, but yeah, going along with what John has said, I think that's very important to put in
Right.
a presentation to our provincial counterparts, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Good news I forgot to share is
Oh,
we're
yes,
already over
please.
$1 million raised in commitments and in cash for the project together. So we're on the way to getting the new MRI installed, hopefully in the spring of 2019.
Thank you very much for your
Thank you very
presentation.
much.
Thank you.
Yes, now we'll have a look at the consent agenda, and there is 2 items here, right? Yes. Everybody happy with that, as is? Councillor Eccles, you move. Seconder, Councillor McQueen, that the following consent agenda items be received and that staff be authorized to take actions necessary to give effect to the recommendations in the staff reports, and that the correspondence be supported or received for information as recommended in the consent agenda. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you for that. The next is report HDR CW 1918 be received, and that Kevin and Jason Tremble be awarded the RFP HOU 1718 to develop affordable housing on part of Park Lot 8, north side of Chester Street, West Plan 500 Durham as GS 38555, except R 44363737, and that the council acknowledges the sale of part lot north side of Chester Street, West Plan 500 Durham as is GS 38555, except R 44367 to Kevin and Jason to Tremble to develop affordable housing is required, and staff be directed to move forward with the sale of the land as approved by the Chief Administrative Officer and in accordance with Sections 1 and 2 of Bylaw 5029-18 being the lame duck, and that the property be sold for the amount necessary to cover the legal costs associated with the transfer of ownership from Grey County to Kevin and Jason Trumbull, estimated at $1,000, and that a grant in lieu of development charges be approved, and that the $44,000 required be funded from a one-time funding reserve. Put that on the floor. Councillor Eccles, Councillor McKean. Hi, Emery.
Hi.
Okay, you're going to make the presentation.
Thank you, and good morning, Council. This, to me, is a good news story. As you're aware, we did have a parcel of land in Durham that is beside some of our public housing. We went out for a request for proposal in September. We did have quite a bit of interest in the request for proposal, but we only did have one submission. It was by Kevin and Jason Tremble. The proposal did meet all of the qualifications that the county required, and also the qualifications required for the Investment in Affordable Housing Program. The proposal is to build 14 one-bedroom units on the parcel of land, 11 of which of those will be affordable, being $577 a month in rent. That does include heat, hydro, parking, and there will be laundry facilities on site. The bottom floor of the apartment building will be accessible, with one unit that will be fully accessible. I guess right now we're just looking for permission then to go ahead with the sale of land. The cost for the legal transfer would be about $1,000, which we would be that would be the sale of land cost. We're also looking for grant in lieu for the development charges for the 11 units that are going to be affordable at $4,000 each. That would be for $44,000. We have submitted the information into the province for the $900,000 grant. They have the information now, so in the next council meeting, I will be coming forward with seeking permission to go ahead with the agreement between ourselves and the Trembles in order to receive that $900,000. That will be on the next council meeting.
Well, thank you for that. Any questions? Councillor Barfoot?
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Clarification, the development charges are our own Grey County development.
They are our own Grey County.
Thank you. Councillor Mackey?
Thanks, Mr. Warden. Emery, 577, is that the maximum amount that can be charged for a
It
unit?
is. According to the Investment in Affordable Housing Program, it has to be 80% of the average market rent. CMHC sets that average market rent, so that does equate to 577. Now in 2019, that'll probably go up a little bit, so it might be around your 582 or something like that if it does go up, but that is the maximum. And that's why we always encourage a mixture of market and affordable, and also that 1,500, so they're getting $150,000 per unit to reduce that cost. So there's a very small mortgage so that you're able to continue to make ends meet with that lower cost.
If I may, Mr. Warden, what are the determining factors in the number of market rentals and the number of subsidized rentals?
So I guess it's looking at that bottom line. So they presented a budget to us. Here's what it's going to cost us. And so they looked at the maximum number of affordable units that they could make and still have a surplus at the end of the year, which would allow them to put money back into a capital reserve.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I think Councillor Hicks, and then I'll go over to this side. Thank you.
Mr. Warden, I'm hearing that all of the ground floor units will be accessible and one will be fully accessible. What's the distinction there?
So a fully accessible unit would be one that would have a walk-in shower, there would be a lowered counter, there would be grab bars around the toilet, so in various areas, and a wider doorways. Well, they'll all have wider doorways, but the accessible part is the movement area. So for instance, a wider doorway that a person in a walker or a wheelchair could go into. Accessible because they're main floor too, so there would be no stairs, no need for a lift and elevator. But the actual inside modifications of the one unit will probably exceed what the other ones would. So it will be fully modified for a person in a wheelchair.
Okay. Councillor Boddy, you had some.
Thank you. Just a thought from issues that the city of Owen Sound's run into. If something happens that we don't get the funding, that it doesn't follow through, is the contract such that the property, the lands would come back to the county?
It is.
Because with the city, we've run into that where we've sold it with a plan that it was going to be developed. It wasn't, and somebody got a really good deal of land that they're
Right.
speculating on, and that's kind of what we want to avoid. So now we're trying to put in that every contract.
Okay.
Thanks.
That's covered? Okay, Councillor Greenfield. Yeah.
Thank you,
Councillor
Mr.
McKee
Board.
or-
Thank you, Anne Marie. Just a couple of questions concerning the building itself. I'm a little bit surprised about the wood frame. I'm assuming that to be cheaper than metal. And the other question I have is 3 stories. Is it going to be an elevator?
There is not, and that's why the whole main floor is going to be accessible. Reason being, when they looked at the land, it's not a huge parcel of land, so for the amount that, or for the space that they had, to put in an elevator in that would take away at least 3 or 4 units. And it is a mix, so the affordable units are for seniors and those maybe with a disability on the bottom floors, and then, you know, the market rents would probably be on the top for people that have the ability to walk up the stairs.
Okay, Councillor McKean, yes.
Yes, thank you, Warden Halliday. Just in, it's kind of to do with the building, same as the previous question. I see that it's got a flat roof. Is this because of height restrictions that are in place in West Grey? I mean, anytime we talk about flat roofs, we've had all kinds of experience with that, both at the county level and the municipal level, and I'm just kind of wondering at why it wasn't a traditional roof. But I'm just kind of wondering, is it because there's height restrictions in West Grey that won't allow for this?
I actually don't have the answer to that. I could find that out. We did talk to the Trembles about the flat roof, and they're well aware of some of the issues and actually looking into a system similar to what we have here. But I'm not sure about the height restrictions for West Grey.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Councillor Fosberg?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Thank you, Anne Marie. So this arrangement with the developer, does it have a lifespan? Does it come to an end? So they own the property, they own the facility, and are those units that are designated affordable going to be forever?
So it's under the Investment in Affordable Housing Program, so it's similar to the previous agreements that we've done with nonprofits in the area. It's a 20-year affordability, so those will remain at an affordable rent for 20 years. After that, the landlord does have the ability to raise rents, but if you look at the size of them, they are less than 600 square foot per unit. Probably they're not ever going to get your $1,500, $1,800 rent. So they probably will remain affordable or at least attainable for their lifespan.
Thank you. And
Thank
just
you.
one additional question. When we talk about taking money from a reserve, so we have an estimation of $44,000 coming from the one-time funding reserve, does this resolution satisfy the auditor's requirement for tracking reserve movements?
It does.
Kevin can speak to that.
Yes, there's a motion from council and the auditors go through all our minutes and ensure that unbudgeted items are approved by council in the form of motions.
Right, thank you.
So that's a fixed number then?
That number is based on the units and based on our development charge rates, so we have to keep the development charges reserve fund whole based on background studies. So in essence, instead of the developer paying, the county's paying that, it'll end up in the development charges reserve fund then as proceeds from development build, and that will then support those development charge background study related capital projects.
Okay, that's understandable. Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you for that. All in favor? Thank you for that. Motion is carried. Anne Marie's still up here, and we'll put on that report HDR CW 2018 be received, and that the cannabis cultivation policy MS HOU 07007 prohibiting cannabis cultivation in county-owned social housing units be approved. Discussion.
Oh.
Anne Marie.
Okay.
Moved and second, sorry. Councillor Boddy, Councillor Klumpus, sorry.
Okay. So at our recent tenant meetings throughout the year, one of the number one concerns from our tenants was what was going to happen when the legalization of cannabis was passed. and whether smoking cannabis in the buildings or growing cannabis in the buildings. So we looked at developing a policy that would enable us to deal with any potential risks or issues, maintain reasonable enjoyment for our tenants, and also look at protecting our own assets, the buildings themselves. So when it comes to smoking, in 2014, the county did pass a bylaw stating that we would work towards smoke-free buildings. It is a difficult process because we did grandfather everybody in. We felt that they were already smoking in our buildings, so it's something that we were going to continue to allow, except for anybody that came in after 2014. It's a tool for us to use to help enforce the non-smoking, and it's something that private-owned buildings do not have. Multi-dwelling buildings are very difficult when it comes to smoke. That's one of the #1 complaints. So we're hoping, and in our policy for smoke-free, we didn't list just tobacco. We said anything that emits smoke, so that would include looking at cannabis. The next was growing of cannabis. So we looked at, with this policy, because of the conditions that are needed in order to grow cannabis, such as the high humidity, the excess electricity, and the fact that it will interfere with people's reasonable enjoyment because there is a strong pungent odor of somebody that is growing cannabis. We're looking at putting that under our Appendix B, which is our rules and regulations. So those rules might include something like a pet policy, well, not a pet policy, but some visitor policies, smoking, barbecues, that sort of thing. So that's all listed in there. We do have the ability as a landlord to add onto that, and so we are adding that we would prohibit the cultivation of cannabis. We are going to make that for all. It is not a past practice that was happening legally in our buildings, so we're hoping that there has been nothing for us to continue, so that practice for it to continue. So we're looking at, obviously, if a person needs cannabis for a medical reason, we would look at accommodating. That does not necessarily mean that they would be allowed to cultivate, but we would certainly work with that tenant. My understanding of medical marijuana is something that is prescribed, that there's an actual dosage, that it is to come from federally or regulated. So we will look at that. There might be some changes that come along with that. That's certainly something that we can look at the policy, but right now we would look at that accommodation for somebody. For an implementation plan, we are looking at notices for everybody, giving them a new copy of the Appendix B of the lease. It'll go in our newsletter, and of course we'll have staff well-versed on our policies so that they can answer any questions on site.
Thank you for that presentation. Any questions of Anne Marie? Councillor Barfoot.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. I mean, the new councils are going to be inundated with this whole issue. I wish you well in that. I guess, just to see, have another joint session on it, yeah. I'm concerned, I guess, on some of the legalities of what is going to be legal moving forward, where people can grow it in their own homes. So, will we get into a legal conflict of saying that the county's not going to allow it, and yet through legislation of the province, it's saying that you can grow it in your own place? So I'm sure you've taken all that into effect, but I'm just saying it looks pretty muddled to me.
So we have looked at that, obviously, and as a landlord, we do have the ability to put in rules that will look at the safety, health and safety, and also the reasonable enjoyment for our other tenants. We have to take that into consideration too. Smoking is not a right, so that's how we sort of have looked at this. We have, for that one person that may want to smoke, we have 100 others that call us saying that it is interfering with their reasonable enjoyment. This is new ground. It is new. We're trying to get ahead of it by saying, this is what we would like to do and prohibit it now instead of there be a precedent setting that everybody has been allowed to grow it and now we've got to grandfather it in. If new legal opinions and cases and whatnot come, then certainly we will relook at the policy, but this is our best effort being put forward to look at the safety and security of our buildings and our tenants.
Thank you for that, Councillor Mackey.
Thank you, Warden. Anne Marie, are there outside spaces at our county housing units that people would be able to use for a garden area and grow it?
Some have that ability, some don't have enough green space. Probably that would be 9 meters away from a building. I guess growing was a little bit different. That might be something we could look at in the future. Again, right now, we're very much trying to look at maybe some of those security issues that might come along with that. So
Well, my question, I guess my point, can we prohibit them from doing that?
We are
You know,
co-
I'm
we are-
not sure that it should be growing on any county
we did put in
property.
here the entire premise.
Entire premise, thank you.
Any other questions of Anne Marie on this? Yes, Councillor Greenfield.
Thanks again, Mr. Warden. Thanks, Anne Marie. The Landlord Tribunal Board, are they a local board or are they a provincial board? And I guess my other question is, have they declared any policy if indeed they are a
So the Landlord Tribunal Board is a provincial board, and for instance, if we had someone who was not paying their rent, we would try and enter into an agreement with them. If they do not abide by the agreement, we will often go to the Landlord Tribunal Board, and we'll again mediate there. So again, they can look at putting a formal agreement in place for us. So we would sort of look at the same thing with smoking or with cultivation. For instance, we have this in our lease, they're going against their lease, and we would probably go there to get a formal agreement with them, not an eviction unless we absolutely had to. But that's what we would be looking for from that board. For smoking, it's difficult because every adjudicator probably looks at the law a little bit differently and looks at the scenario a little bit differently. For smoking, we've had some good successes where we go to the adjudicator and we say, this person is smoking in our building. We would like a formal agreement with them on this, and they can provide that formal agreement for us. There's been no precedent set so far for any of the cultivation, so I'm not sure how an adjudicator would at this time look at it, other than the fact that it would be in our lease, so it should be, as a landlord, something we should be able to enforce. At least it's a tool.
Thank you for that. Any other further questions? Okay. Call the motion. All in favor of accepting this motion? That motion is carried. Thank you for that. Thank you, Anne Marie. Next, we move on to an IT project, in that the report ITR CW 0718 be received, and that staff follow the county's purchasing procedures, section 11.2G, and that council's surplus technology equipment be sold through a public process. Jody? Oh, well, let's put it on the floor. Councillor Pringle, Councillor Mackey, it's now on the floor for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. We've had a few members of council just ask for clarification on what we typically do with the hardware you're using when a new term of council starts. So I think this might be my briefest report yet, but basically just a bit of information around the purchasing policies that were approved in 2014. In there it states that surplus assets are not sold directly to members of staff or council. Although that does not prohibit anyone from bidding on those through a public auction. So our procedure through purchasing and through IT is to take any hardware that's going to be decommissioned, erase any data that's on that hardware, reset it to factory settings, and then make it available for public auction. The things that we can accommodate, if anybody is interested in taking their phone or their iPad, we can post those as individual units to that auction website and let you know specifically which one is yours. The other thing that we can do is if anyone wants to keep their phone number, then we can contact our vendor and basically arrange for that to transfer ownership from the county to the individual council member. And that is basically it. Are there any questions?
Okay, that's good update. Any questions? Councillor Pringle.
Yes, thank you, Warden. Thank you, Jody, for the update. You've just mentioned there about the phone number. The explanation was that we were responsible, but you do have a way of transferring that phone number to hold it temporarily?
Yes, so I initiate that transfer. There would be some paperwork. Sorry, I forgot to mention, if you do want to do that, please just let IT know. If you're staying with Bell, which is who we currently use, I believe it can be fairly quick, and it can be not so fairly quick sometimes, depending on how they want to get along with their competitors. But we'll certainly initiate it, and if it's not, there may just be the bills coming here that we would send back.
And if I could, just further to that, Mr. Warden, the other question is, what would be the date then that we would need to have any information transferred off of this device to our private device, just to store? What would be the date that would that be at our next meeting?
Yes, ideally, when you're handing them in for the last meeting, if you want to take any information off it, so we can erase it and not worry about it, any of your personal information. If you are going to transfer your number, then we would, I presume, accommodate you with that device until the transfer is complete.
Okay, good, thank you.
Councillor McQueen?
Mr. Warden, so the iPad I used here, I use it for both county and municipal, and I have pictures on our municipal roads and stuff like that. Does it have to be erased before it goes to the auction? Because if we're successful to buy it, then why would you want to erase it if it's there? If you're not successful, then you can erase it. Is that a possibility?
Being that it's a county device going for personal use, yes, we would still erase it, because there could be any history of any in-camera documents or email or anything else you access to it, not to mention network settings to get onto any corporate network. So as long as it's transferring out of the county, it will be erased.
So how do we transfer that stuff out of here to save it somewhere? I guess that's the next question, like photos and stuff like that. How do we go about doing that?
Do they have iCloud accounts now?
Yes.
So that would be the,
For now, yeah. So I believe everybody's set up those accounts. That's one thing that I will have to check for clarification, but depending on how you set up the Apple ID account, all that stuff, all your photos can be synced to a cloud service that you can access through a website. I would just want to confirm that we didn't set those up with Grey County email addresses. That's the only thing. Otherwise, you could do something similar. There's lots of free services out there like Dropbox or your Gmail account, where you can take that content off your device and sync it to a shared folder on the iPad.
So can you send that information to us to help us out a little bit, or is that possible?
I can, yeah, I'll prepare a little primer on how to do some of those things and send it on to all members of council.
So the other question is, Mr. Warden, is if those that are coming back, we have devices and they're going from Apple to Apple, can that be transferred onto the new device before it's erased and then erased?
Again, that would be synced through the Apple ID account, but we can certainly set it up with the same Apple ID and make that available to
So
you.
it can transfer before it's erased? Like there's text messages, like I might have 150 different contacts in here, phone contacts.
I'm not sure on the text messages, contacts, photos, that can be transferred, yeah.
Okay, so you can find out about how we do that. So that we would do that, so we need to do that in sync with the time to come here, do that, flip it, erase it, so we can save
I
that.
suggest an appointment with IT
Yeah.
would be appropriate.
Right. Well, there's 18 of us, so.
Yeah, well, they can accommodate it, so. Councillor Vosper.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. So just to clarify, we are in office until the new council is sworn in. So my assumption is the deadline to return devices is just prior to the new council being sworn in? Is that a correct assumption? You mentioned the next meeting date. Is it the next meeting date, or?
I think what we're hearing is that you all have some concerns with regard to being able to transfer information that you have now. You want to be able to continue to access that. So I think job one for us is to confirm what the situation is for those iCloud accounts and just put out the steps and distribute those so you all know exactly what's involved in retaining information that you wish to have going forward to the future. With that information, then we can determine whether this is something that most of you will be able to do on your own or whether or not you're going to need some assistance. Because if you're going to need some assistance, then IT is going to have to organize the time, and that may have some impact. This is as much about your convenience. The 22nd, if is that the right date, is the next time that many of you would be here. So trying to make that as convenient for you as possible without having to make second trips to Owen Sound if that's not a place you come to every day. But we'll work with you to make sure that this happens and that you are able to be as productive as you need to be going forward.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other Okay, all in favor of this motion? Motion carried. Thank you, Jody, for dealing with that. The next is a planning motion that will be handled by Scott. That report PDR CW 3818 regarding an overview of proposed plan of subdivision application 42T 2018-11 consisting of 33 residential parcels of land described as part of Lot 9 Concession 7 and parts Lots 71, 75, 78, 85, 86, 87, unnamed street, and Lots 72, 73, 74, Plan 117, Township of Georgian Bluffs, Geographic Township of Derby, be received for information. Put that on the floor. The boys from Georgian Bluffs there. Okay. Councillor Burley and Councillor Barfoot. Thank you. Scott.
Great, thanks, Warden Halliday, members of the committee. So we couldn't have a council meeting on planning day without at least one planning report. So here's our planning report for the day. Yeah, what we have before us is a proposed plan of subdivision in the secondary settlement area of Kilsyth in Georgian Bluffs. The lands that are subject to this application are shown up there highlighted in teal. They're about 17 hectares in size. Currently, or as of the date of this photo, there was both a dwelling and a barn on the property. That dwelling has since been removed, and the barn is slated to be removed, but there's a technical issue with a barn swallow that may have taken up habitat there. The lands are surrounded by residential development in part. The former school site is of course across Grey Road 5. That school has now been removed. The community center is located on the southeast of this proposed development, and there's some farmlands to the south and the west there. As I said, what we have before us is a plan of subdivision. They are looking at 33 new residential lots. There would be a new road which connects Grey Road 5 to Concession 7 there, or Mill Street. They are looking at 2 stormwater management facilities, as well as a large parkland block, which would be immediately in behind the community center, which makes good sense in that regard. We are still very early in the process. Associated with this plan of subdivision application, we have accompanying applications for zoning amendment and local official plan amendment to the Township of Georgian Bluffs. So we're working very closely with township staff to make sure we have coordinated efforts in this regard. The lots are being proposed on private services, so there would be private wells and septic systems, as Kilsyth doesn't have municipal services at this stage. So there have been a series of technical reports to support utilizing private services there, and the county and the township are in the process of having the servicing and stormwater reports peer reviewed, just to make double sure that everything's sound in that regard. This is the beginning of the process. We're just starting to go to the public on this one and trying to get public and agency comments. We don't have a public meeting scheduled yet, but we look forward to that in the future. And a more thorough planning staff report will come back to this committee after the public process with a final recommendation on the application. As such, the recommendation at this stage is just to receive the application, but I'd certainly be happy to take any questions, or if the committee has any early feedback on this application, we'd certainly love to receive it so we can work towards addressing that feedback down the road.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, Councillor Barfoot.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. I guess the frustration on this is, like any good developer, this company has been working on this for a number of years. When we were going through the accommodation review process for the Derby School, we laid this out to them and said, look, there's a plan of subdivision to be across the road. And at that time, the board officials turned a blind eye and said, well, if we don't see it approved, we're not taking that into consideration, which is, when you look at hindsight, I mean, that was totally a wrong decision on the board's part. We knew that this was in the works and at some point will likely go through, which could have probably saved that, or would have been one of the things that may have saved that school. Anyway, that's history gone by. I think it's a great situation moving forward from the municipal standpoint. I've been involved in the process somewhat up till now, and certainly support this coming forward and going through the process.
And thanks, Councillor Barfoot. I empathize with the board's lack of, let's say, intuition of what's actually happening. So, but receiving it early for information puts it on the record that it's something is happening. So I guess it's really good to get that out early. Yes, Councillor Eccles.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Through you to Scott.
Yeah.
A couple of subdivisions have appeared in West Grey. We even spoke about one at the last county council meeting here in Blue Mountains, was about walkability and walking within that subdivision. Now, I know that this is very early, but there is, I don't see any indication of sidewalks, but maybe that street isn't quite to scale. It's 155 feet wide, and there'll be all kinds of places for people to walk on it, or, anyways, I think you recognize what the question is. On sidewalks within these seem to be more towards better planning, and when we're on this planning day thing, I thought that's what we would be looking at.
You want to comment on?
Sure. Good comments, and thank you for those comments. It's certainly something we can work with the developer and the township on moving forward. At this stage, sidewalks haven't been proposed, but if it's something that the township is supportive of, as they would ultimately be the maintainers of those sidewalks, then we do encourage it in all new residential developments where it can be accommodated. So good comments. Thank you for that.
Thank you for that. Councillor McKean.
Thanks, Warden Halliday. To Scott, could you go back to the first slide? Yeah, that one right there. No, there is some development already in Kilsyth. It's going to add another 33 wells and septic tanks. Does there get to be a saturation point in an area for that type of thing? What would trigger the installation of a public system? I mean, I'm taking a look at it. You're going to likely have somewhere in the name of 50 units in a very, very tight area. So what is the saturation point where that takes place?
Sure, good question. We've had discussions with what used to be the Ministry of the Environment, now it's the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks on that in the past. And they are encouraging all municipalities to look at that. When do you hit that tipping point? With any application of this nature, they have to provide what's called a servicing options study. And the servicing options study starts with, well, we're going to service it with municipal water and sewer, unless there's a reason why we can't. And when they look at reasons why they can't, the first reason would be there's no municipal water and sewer there right now. But then they also need to look at, well, is it feasible to have municipal services here? You know, at this stage, the determination has been for the number of lots they can't. In talking with the Ministry of the Environment in the past, they don't have a standard number. You know, if you have X number of lots per Y number of hectares, then you're at that tipping point. They do say it varies greatly depending on the size of the lots, but also on the soil conditions that are there. Across Grey County, I don't think we have any other communities that would be quite this small that would have it. And there are some additional development lands to the north of this, including the former school site, that have potential for further development. So it's something we'll have to monitor with the township as we move forward if there's other development applications there. But based on past experience, I'm not sure that we've hit that point quite yet, but it's something we do need to keep an eye on. And if there was ever a desire to expand this settlement area, then that would be one of the first discussions we'd be having.
Good answer and good question. Councillor Fossbrook?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Thank you, Scott. Your report, top of the second page, the subject lands are located in the secondary settlement area. And then later on, the proposed plan of subdivision is within an existing settlement area. What is the definition of secondary? Because I know, or I believe, that in some transitions of official plans and designations, that we've had communities that have lost the designation of hamlet. So is hamlet secondary? Can you elaborate on how we define those terms? Thank you.
Sure. Great question, and maybe just a bit of a history here. So when the Grey County official plan was ultimately approved by the Intermunicipal Board in the year 2000, we essentially had two main settlement area designations. There was the urban areas, which captured primarily our fully serviced communities, and then we had our hamlets. When the county undertook a 5-year review in the year 2005, that was ultimately approved in 2012 by the board. We broke down those hamlets to recognize that not all hamlets were created equally, and some had different levels of service. And that at that time, we came up with the primary, secondary, and tertiary settlement areas. The primary would still be our fully serviced communities like the Owen Sounds, the Durhams, the Thornburys of the world. And then the secondaries and the tertiaries were our former hamlets. The secondary settlement areas were the ones that generally had a slightly higher level of service than some of the other hamlets. So in this case, when that analysis was done in 2005, 2006-ish, we looked at Kilsyth, and because there was more community services there was a church, there was a school, there was a community center, there was some commercial operations and some houses, it made the cut for being a secondary settlement area. And then if we jump forward to the last county council meeting, council adopted the bylaw for the new county official plan. In this case, we've taken another step and we'll only have primary settlement areas and secondary settlement areas, which are an amalgam of the current secondary and tertiary. So moving in the current official plan, Kilsyth is secondary, and in the new proposed official plan, which is sent to the province yesterday, it will remain secondary. And that was in recognition of the fact that it was more than just a collection of houses. There were some community services there as well.
Thank you for that. Yes?
Thank you very much for that. So a community that was formerly tertiary is no longer a settlement?
No, in this case, sorry, through you, Mr. Warden. In this case, what council has adopted through the new official plan is that all secondary and tertiary settlement areas are now considered secondary. From a policy perspective, although we saw differences on the ground in terms of those communities that had additional services, the policies really weren't that different between what could be considered in a secondary or a tertiary. So we thought, why repeat ourselves and have two separate sets of policies that are saying essentially the same thing? There is still the recognition that, you know, in some settlement areas, there's still more lands open for growth than others. Some of those former tertiaries, the boundaries are fairly tight to the existing development. But from a policy perspective, both the secondary and the tertiary will be treated as secondary moving forward.
I believe I understand it now. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Call the motion. All in favor? Thank you, Scott, for Planning 101 on this. Thank you. Good questions. All right, the next will be Kevin will. Oh, I'm getting a yellow card, is that? We'll call a timeout for a 5-minute break. Thank you. Is a report regarding the appointment of the auditors for 2018 fiscal year end be received, and that council approves the single sourcing of external audit services for the 2018 fiscal year as per the county's purchasing procedures section 4.3F2, and that BDO Canada LLP be appointed auditors for the County of Grey in accordance with section 296 of the Municipal Act for the audit of 2018 fiscal records, and that the necessary bylaw be presented to council. Put that on the floor. Councillor Mackey, Councillor Patterson, Kevin, it's all yours.
Thank you. Yeah, the purpose of the report is to recommend the appointment of the firm of BDO Canada Chartered Accountants to act as the auditors for the County of Grey for the 2018 fiscal year. The Municipal Act requires a municipality appoint an auditor that's licensed under the Public Accounting Act and who's responsible for auditing our financial statements. In addition, the Act also states the auditor of a municipality shall not be appointed for a term exceeding 5 years. So back in 2013, we went out on an RFP. BDO was a successful proponent and was appointed at that time for a period of 5 years. So that time frame is up now, so we need to come back and appoint someone. The reason I'm here looking to single source this is that we're undergoing a lot of change with our long-term care, with policies and procedures, and we're still working with Sienna trying to understand what all those processes and stuff will look like and the procedures. And in order for, to put this out to procurement, that will be some of the items that the auditors will want to understand is where will all these records be held, approval processes, all those kind of things that they need to audit, and we don't really know those yet. So that would then, I could see leading to, if we did go out and award and things changed and stuff, we'd be then getting into additional charges by the hour for what they think were out of scope and stuff. So what I'm recommending is that for the 2018 year, until we can understand all those and have the policies and procedures and the controls and understand them and agree to those with Sienna, that we in essence, do not go out and procure for the 2018 audit, and that we single source this to BDO. And I contacted Tracy Smith, the partner of BDO, asking if they'd be willing to honor their current contract and what they'd be looking at for the price. And she came back in a formal letter stating that they would honor what they've put in their RFP, and they would honor their current price and for the audit of the 2018 fiscal year. It was qualified, though, if council did direct me to go out and procure it for a year, that they would have the ability then to change their pricing based on an RFP process. So like I said, again, I'm here based on what's occurring with long-term care and stuff. I'm asking that the council we appoint BDO and that we single source this to them for the audit of the 2018 fiscal year.
Thank you, Kevin, for that. That was well thought out. Any questions of Kevin? Councilor Hosberg.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Kevin, could you just remind me, how long has BDO been the auditor for the county?
40-some years or so.
How many?
40. I don't know the exact number. It's at least 40 years, I would say.
So I do have a concern that, you know, in principle, the idea of independence and so forth, you know, there, in my opinion, should come a time when we say, you know what, we're going to concertedly go to somebody else. That's my comment.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Next up is Pat Hoy and the minimum maintenance standards updates. That report TRCW 4218 minimum maintenance standards update be received, and that the addendum to report TRCW 4218 regarding the minimum maintenance standards update be received, and that the maintenance standards and transportation services protocol be updated in Grey County Winter Control Operator Handbook, and that a bylaw be brought forward for council's consideration. Put that on the floor. Councillor McKean, Councillor Greenfield, Patrick.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I won't go through the entire minimum maintenance standard again. This is just an update from Graham's report last week. So there was some concern from this committee about just exactly where we stood legally with having paved shoulders that were not being signed, that were going to be not maintained in the winter. So we went back to got another opinion from our legal and our Cowan, from Brian Anderson at Cowan, our insurer. We are and our own lawyer, Michael, of course, and we're very confident that, and all opinions basically agree, that we definitely do not meet the definition of a bicycle lane with our paved shoulder. So we're really under no obligation to maintain those facilities. That being said, we are going to provide information to cyclists to make them aware that we won't be maintaining them. I'm hoping, you know, the instance of people driving on them would be fairly rare anyway, from October to April, middle April, you would think. I'm sure they'll start when the spring goes, but so really that's the only thing in the report, and basically it was about closing the paved shoulders for winter maintenance. The two we are going to sign, Grey Road 1 and Grey Road 19, which do satisfy actually official bike lanes, as they have a cyclist symbol on them. And then just the winter storm event that we're going to declare as well, if we meet the criteria. So those are the two issues, and I think we are very confident that it meets all our criteria. So
Good, that's great. Any questions of Patrick? Seeing none, that's all in favor of the motion? Thank you for that. It's carried. Okay. The next is, has been inserted due to the timeliness of the settlement. So Grant McLevy's up here, and we're going to put the report HHR CW 0418 regarding the QP Local 1530 memorandum of settlement be received, and that the collective agreement between the County of Grey and the QP Local 1530 Transportation Services be ratified. Councillor Hicks and Councillor Klumpus, it's on the floor. Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Warden and County Council. We are happy to say that we have a deal with QP, and this is really an update to my last meeting with you a couple of weeks ago, where we were kind of getting down to a strike deadline. We had the mediator come back in, so second day of conciliation, and through that process, going back and forth, we managed to get a deal right at your 1.61, which was the mandate of council and the one that we wanted to stick to. Negotiations took all day. There was lots of people there, including Pat and our CAO and a few other people from HR. The report really speaks for itself. We have about 1.61 over a 3-year period, so it's a 3-year term. There's also some information in there. We added on, we increased a meal allowance from $9 to $11. The reason for that is it's more in keeping with the other people who do receive meal allowances. And that came out to, I think, is about $1,300. So we are right within, I believe, scope. And those couple of things, those couple of changes, and a couple of changes with some of the scheduling provisions and so on, I think solidified the agreement, and we got rid of a lot of garbage that we felt was in there that didn't need to be there. So it is a straightforward, I believe, simple agreement, and I think it's a fair deal for all sides.
Thank you, Grant, and thank you for the staff for bringing that forward. Any comments? Yes, John.
Yes, thank you. Grant, so just, it's a 3-year deal, so in 3 years, does it end in November, or did it get rolled back to June?
It is going to be ending May 31st. So the end date is always May 31st, and what we try and do is start pushing negotiations in April. And what they try and do is try saying that they're not available till November. So that's how that goes.
It's a dance, yes. Yes, Councillor Barfoot.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. I just have a question on practice and process. After our last meeting, as you mentioned, Grant, direction was given, and it wasn't very long after that where there was radio advertisements that the union had put forward. Is that normal practice that they would put those out prior to the meeting being, or actually the meeting had been scheduled, actually, for with the mediator? And to me, that was a bit of a sour note when we hadn't even met yet.
I will say that once we met the first day with the conciliator, it was really our agenda to push the negotiations quicker. So we asked for a no-board report because the union was not getting back to us. There were 3 weeks there that we tried to get in touch with them every day to set a date. And it was decided that we wanted a no-board report, and all of a sudden they've got all kinds of dates available because they don't want to be locked out. So it was after we issued the no-board report that you started to hear those ads. Was it offside? To me, it's just part of the process. And we don't take it personally. We just try and respond the best we can. And what we were trying to get them to understand is that we cannot be without services. It's not an option for us, and that's something that Kim was driving the whole time in regards to the press release and so on. I'm not sure if that answers your question or not.
Not really, but and I noticed yesterday those ads are still on the radio as of yesterday. So certainly a disconnect somewhere between the union and the media when they're still doing that. You know, one report from the news media is saying we've reached an agreement, which is great news, but the other is that they're still this union is still paying for those ads being on the radio.
Right.
I guess they paid forward, but anyhow, that's great information. Thank you. Thank you, Grant. Any other questions of Grant? Well, Grant's up. Yes, Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Just briefly, what we have attached to the staff report is a portion of the collective agreement that addresses the settlement. It's not the entire agreement.
No, what you have in the staff report are the changes and the detailed discussions, the agreed-to items, whether removing or adding something to the collective agreement. The entire collective agreement is a public agreement, and we have 10 separate collective agreements. The reports that you see here never really have the 50 or 60 pages of the old agreement. Once the new agreement is updated, then any of the council, actually anybody in Ontario, anybody in the province, whatever, can get copies of those agreements. They're all public documents.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, seeing it. John, you're just scratching your, okay.
Sold. No.
Thank you for that. All in favor of this motion? Thank you very much. The motion is carried. Thank you. Okay. Our Pat is still up here with another interesting report. It's report TRCW 4518, the Grey County Quarry options be received, and that council support in principle divesting the property through a tender process subject to attaining the agreed-upon reserve value, and that staff bring forward a report and draft tender documents for council's consideration in January 2019. Pat. Mover and seconder, sorry. Councillor Barfoot. Councillor Bell. No, I got him. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I think I'm just going to go through the report here, and then at some point, we're going to go into closed session to get into specifics of the consultant report. So I'm just kind of going to, summarize what we've got in our report here, that, the quarry opened in 2002 with a maximum extraction of 250,000 tons a year. We averaged about 62,000 tons a year for the first 10 years it was open. We used it basically for our own projects. That being said, we probably spent, we were very committed to using our own material, probably more committed than we should have been, as trucking was probably the controlling expense, and maybe why the quarry wasn't as efficient as it could have been. As per our consultant report, there's about 1.7 million tons of material left above the water table in the quarry. Right now, that's all we have a license to extract. Eventually, if someone was to follow through that process of getting approval for below the water table, there might be anywhere from 3.2 million to 6.4 million tons of material. So, and there's also 22 licensed properties within 25 kilometers of the quarry. So in the report, it summarizes on the chart on page 64 these 6 options, which the quarry report's kind of given us, it's kind of narrowed in on the 2 options that we kind of just figured it was going to. Clearly, leaving it as inactive is just kind of revenue neutral. That's kind of what we've been doing. There's not a big point in having it just sit there. As far as they have an option of surrendering the license, which would be no purpose in doing that, so that was quickly discounted. We didn't want to resume the way we were doing it because we don't really use that much material. When you're crushing material and blasting and you're only, you use 60,000 for all your jobs, but you're not gonna truck your material to Southgate, for example, from there. So we knew the old operation wasn't really acceptable for us. And then, so the 4th option was to go below the water table, to maybe under our operation, apply to go below the water table. Well, those studies would probably be about $600,000 to give yourself a chance to access that 3.2 million to 6.4 million tons. So you're investing that 600,000. There hasn't been a lot of information on whether or not that would be acceptable to the NEC or the environment. We really haven't, and you'll see in the report, but it hasn't really been investigated that much. And as a public entity, it's hard to kind of commit that kind of money to take a chance on maybe getting more material that is really so far beyond what we'd ever need. It's hard to justify. So The report basically got us down to options 5 and 6, 5 being lease the quarry and 6 being sell the quarry. A previous report had come where leasing wasn't really investigated, and that was kind of, I know a lot of operators currently have leases, and I was hoping that it would be really well investigated, because I think we were looking to see if the consultant could establish kind of a compelling case that leasing was the way to go. We know it's not our core, as far as selling it, we know it's not our core business. There's definitely a lack of expertise at the county in running and operating a quarry. So selling it has that upside of, we're out of the picture, there's no liability left for us. We haven't had a hard time getting material from existing sources, and it's just one more thing that, probably the thing we're least talented at being on our plate to do, is run a quarry. So that's why, kind of, from our point of view, selling it is probably the way to go. Leasing it, you know, there's some site plan amendments we would have to make if we wanted to get beyond that 1.7 million tons. If the contractor that was leasing it from went insolvent, there might be some issues there. If there was, you know, some sort of environmental spill or some opposition, the county would be pushing, you know, a quarry and below the water table, or however that would work, on a residence, which might not be in favor of it, which is not a great spot for us to be in. So that's kind of just, that's why we've come to the recommendation of divesting ourselves of the quarry moving forward. So there's more information to come here in the closed session here, but.
Any questions this time? Councillor Pringle.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Pat, at one point, one time, there was a large pile of processed material above ground. Did we get rid of that material, or is it still sitting there as well?
Through you, Mr. Warden, there is still some there. We've got rid of as much as we could. We've used as much as we could. We used a bunch on 119 and a few different places, but there is still some piles there. Some of it is not really, wouldn't create a big purpose for us. There wouldn't be a reason to really use some of it, but there is still some there, yeah. It would be, you know, in the agreement somehow.
It was below standard, actually, at the time for certain things.
A lot of it was, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Thanks for that, Bob. Councillor Barfoot, then Councillor McLean.
Mr. Warden, I've got a lot I'd like to say about it, but I'm curious, can we go and do the in-camera portion first, or I guess I'm curious?
Absolutely. Any questions on the open format then? Councillor McQueen?
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and maybe to Scott. So you're saying about an NEC amendment, so it is in the NEC area? So what is that, the rural? Is it under the rural designation? I don't know if Scott or anybody can.
There's about 3 different ones, isn't there?
Yeah, well, it won't be natural, that's for sure, but I'm assuming it's rural.
I'm not sure about that.
I believe prior to the last floor plan review of the Niagara Escarpment Plan, there was recognition of the fact that it was a quarry there. Under the last floor plan review, inadvertently, the Niagara Escarpment changed the designation on it, and I think they put it into the Niagara Escarpment Parks and Open Space designation. We advised them of that as soon as possible, and my understanding was they were going to see about making that administrative change. It sounds like it was a case of they saw that it was publicly owned lands, and therefore it got lumped in with the other publicly owned lands. But my understanding, talking to their staff, was that it was clear that it did have the permissions under their plan, or at least previously did, to own and operate the quarry. But I understand that that's above the water table at this stage. But.
Okay.
So just following up that is, so is the boundary line, is there a where is that boundary line? Is it on the edge of the boundary, or is it further? I don't have a plan in front of me or whatever. I guess I could soon look it up. But the other thing is under the new policy of the NEC, and I'm going to look at you, Pat, and we've continued to maintain and operate this, right? Right. Okay, he said that, because what happens under the new plan, if it ceases to exist, there's an issue with that, but maybe because it's a licensed area and license has been renewed, then that may be that exemption, because that is a change in the plan. That is, if something that ceases to continue, it reverts back, and that was, it used to be 5 years. So, but because we've been keeping the license up and stuff, I'm sure we'll be fine in that sense and that sort of thing. Just something to, you know.
We've been submitting our reports annually.
Yeah. So that would keep it live. I think that's a good thing. Yeah.
One thing that has lapsed, and this is noted, is the permit to take water off the site.
But that would be more of the MOE, right?
Could I ask the CAO to speak into the microphone, please?
Sorry.
Thank you. Could you just repeat that into the microphone?
What I said was that we have been submitting our reports annually with regard to material taken off the site. What has lapsed is the permit to take water for activity at the site, so.
Okay.
So-
Yes, Counselor, are you finished?
Well, just in summary, then that makes it a better value, that it's current, the license has been upkept, and so that sort of makes a higher value, I would say. In that sense.
I hope so. You're Counselor Greenfield. And then we'll,
Mr. Warden, thanks, Pat. The aggregate in this particular quarry, this goes back a number of years. I haven't heard this comment recently, but a number of years ago, there were local politicians and also local roads directors, and I often heard that the stone from the Grey County quarry was superior to most stone from other quarries. And I don't know if that, I'm not an engineer, I don't know if this, stones are stones. But are we, like in your opinion, is that the case, or is it enough of a factor to take into consideration here, if needed is the case?
Gee, Mr. Warden, actually, funny, a guy said that at training this week. He said the quarry material was the best material he ever packed. Is what one of our guys said who was around when we were using that material. So, yeah, I know we had it tested. It's reasonable for asphalt. There's lots of uses of it. I've heard nothing but kind of glowing remarks on the material.
that's
Yeah,
good,
so-
when you're shining it up and selling it. Okay. Yes, Counselor Rosberg.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Two questions. When this was initially developed, was there an actual business plan? And did something change that affected what the plan was long-term for this pit? That's one question. And then the other is point 2, under options, it says, cost of rehabilitation itself would be significant. Wouldn't we have built the cost of rehabilitation into our budget? I mean, it would stand to reason that you have to have a plan for rehabilitation, so I would think that we would have already budgeted for that. So it's kind of related. What was the plan? How did it change? And what have we in fact budgeted for?
If I'll speak to the latter part of that. The rehabilitation of quarries, pits and quarries, has been a bit of an evolving piece of work. I don't think that even today, we're entirely sure what rehabilitation would require at the end of the life of this particular site. I don't think back in 2002 that there was a significant wealth of information about exactly what those requirements were. And even then, as I said, they've continued to evolve. So it's not my sense that there's a significant amount of resource put away towards that end, but I see the treasurer has a comment
Yes, the
as
treasurer
well.
did you set up a reserve?
The county has been putting away money based on what has been extracted, based on a tonnage. So we've got 84,000 that has been placed in a quarry reserve for the purpose of rehabilitation.
Right, that's good, that's important. Yes, Councillor Fosbrook.
And thank you for that. So was there in fact a business plan to support moving forward with this when we ventured into it?
Staff,
I guess I'm the longest serving staff here, but I at that time was not privy to those committee meetings, and I don't recall, there was probably lots of verbal report discussion and stuff, but I'm not aware of a business case report, but there maybe could be one, but I've never been able to find it, so.
okay, thank you. John?
Thank you. I guess I'll weigh in on the rehab of the pit. It really does depend on your rehab costs, whether you, like if we go below the water table, eventually when the material's been extracted, it'll become a lake. So that rehabilitation is totally different than if you stay above the water table. So I don't know, as a business plan, I guess you could have two models. You could have the one where we take out the 1.7 tons and then we rehabilitate it down like they do an aggregate or agricultural standard. But if you go below the water table, then you're going to be actually creating an inland lake, and that will be a different rehabilitation strategy.
Any other questions? So I think we'll approve it as is, and then we'll go in close. All in favor of the motion as?
No?
We go in close first? Okay. All right, so let's motion to go into closed meeting matters, that the Committee of the Whole does now go into closed session pursuant to Section 239(2) of the Municipal Act 2001 to discuss a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board. Put that on the floor then?
If I may, we have a motion on the floor, do we not?
We can go into closed.
Motion?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's right.
So
So-
Councilor Pringle.
Councilor Pringle, Councilor Hicks, all right, so now we're into closed session.
Presented, the motion that stands here, if it's supported, means we only go the option of selling.
Yep.
That's the recommendation that you would be providing to the incoming council, because all of this needs to be revisited. What we wanted to do, because the people around this table are the ones who have had a long discussion with us through trying to get this report forward, we wanted you to have an opportunity as a council to state your views on this. So if we put this to a vote, then, and it passed, then you would support in principle divestment subject to a reserve. If you voted down, then we can have another
I
conversation.
was just gonna say, if it was voted down, then a subsequent motion could come forward then to explore the leasing option.
Yes,
That would be correct.
That'd be the cleanest way.
that's clean.
Okay.
Okay, any other discussion on the motion? Yes?
Would there not be an amendment to the motion that would say you could come back with two options of looking at what it would, about selling it versus lease, and then you narrow down to two
We're
options?
essentially doing that anyway, I think.
In a two-step program, I
When we
think.
bring it back to the next council.
But anyhow, I think Councilor Barfoot will probably, if it fails, will be there to pick up the pieces. Okay, let's call the motion. All in favor? Okay, that motion is lost. Opposed? Two up? Three up? Opposed? Are you opposed? Opposed. Yeah, well, I'm just still catching up on the first phase, sir. Okay, opposed? All right, so that motion is lost. Okay, so, and do I hear any other motions? Councilor Eccles, Councilor Buffett?
I would say it's not a motion, it just give direction to staff to bring back a leasing option.
We'll put that in a motion. Yes.
Do you want to put it in a motion?
Yeah.
So.
To the new
staff-
council?
To bring back your
A report.
recommendation to the incoming council is that they consider the leasing option.
Right.
Okay.
The staff be directed to bring back a report regarding leasing options on the Grey County Quarry, or of the Grey County Quarry. Move that.
Barfoot is seconded. Any other discussion on that motion? Councilor Foster?
Do we need to further stipulate that there be a link to all the historic information? I'm not trying to paralyze anybody. I know the term analysis paralysis, but put it all in one place so that anybody can review the historic information available. And furthermore, I would hope that this would be accompanied by some financial reporting.
But I don't know whether you want to get specific, Councilor Eccles?
I don't want to messy it up too much. These are just things that to me make good
I
sense.
think there's an understanding that more fulsome reporting is needed. So, yes, Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. I wonder, is there an opportunity to find the expertise? You know, you're not happy, Pat, with the consultant we have right now. If we're bringing back leasing options, where do we get the best advice on what should be in a leasing option, knowing that we don't have the expertise?
Yes, Councillor Barfoot.
Well, that's what I said, I mentioned that before. I think you get the Millers of the world, you get a representative from there, you get a representative from HSC to come in, and you get those guys to sit at the table and say, how are you going to, you're looking to bid on this, what do you want to see in there? Make sure those guys, they're not going to agree on on everything, but they're going to agree on the process for the wording because they're going to bid on it.
Well, that's good. It's good advice, similar to what we do. Yes, John.
If I could add to that, and I think that's Councillor Barfoot's suggestion is good. I also think that you could actually invite some members of the public to participate in it too. That'll give you the balance between the industry and the public.
Yes, okay. Okay, that's information that is valuable. Yes, Councillor Reedfield. Well, it's broad. I mean, the word leasing can mean a lot, so. No. Well, I think everybody understands that, Harley. I think it was a good discussion today. There's been a lot of good information, and there are some new citizens available that do have some expertise that maybe make themselves available to staff. So anyhow, let's call the motion. Yes.
When you bring back, and talking here now, right? When I bring back those options for leasing, do we want an option that we just get so much per ton and we have nothing else to do with it?
I think we've taken that advice from our conversation today, that there are simple and less simple ways forward with leasing, so we'll try to make sure that those are captured.
$4 a ton or something like that.
That information, I think staff will undertake how they want to do that. Okay, so one other point, yes?
So, understanding that this is not going to be a quick turnaround, I also wonder, should there be a time frame attached to that, at least as a goal, so that the new council gets good information, maybe it takes a little while for them to get it, and then from there, the discussions can unfold, so you're not looking at 4 years from now, the same situation.
Thanks
There's
for
no
that comment.
time frame to that.
Councillor Eccles, if you want to put any time restraints or
Nope.
Okay.
Leave it the way it is. It's open.
everything, I think there's good advice in what you're saying there, and I think, it'll be monitored, so.
So if I may, then, can staff give us a ballpark of within what time frame they believe this might come back?
I think what I'd like to do is have the opportunity to consult with Michael and get some advice from him about the expertise that he or his colleagues might be able to bring to this discussion. We haven't had that conversation yet. I think as staff, we'll need to regroup and think about what's potential.
Right.
If nothing else, we do have one more meeting. If I can try and get some sense of time and expertise, we can try and talk about that before at the next meeting.
And I thank you for that. And I guess the essence of my point is that even if we only make incremental progress, I think it's important or would be beneficial to provide incremental progress to the new council so that they can take this one bite at a time. I wouldn't want to see, a monster report arrive and let's make a decision right now. I think that would not be in the best interest of the long-term objective. Thank
Agree.
you.
I think Councillor Eccles saying that it doesn't cost us a lot to sit on it, and it is increasing in value, so therefore, it's probably timely and wise to, to proceed with prudence. Okay, so any other, okay, so let's call the motion. All in favor? Motion's carried. Okay, where are we? Other business. Yes, the other business that would be a discussion on the delegation requests for the 2018 Roma Conference. Did anybody want to lead that?
Could it be the 2019 conference? The 18 one's already done.
You're going to get a job as a proofreader.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Eccles. Okay, the ones that I've had note of so far, and I would appreciate your feedback on status of school projects. There are a number of school projects that are kind of languishing. So school projects, hospital funding, as we heard this morning, if we could get some additional information around that, maybe that would be a conversation we could have. There's an ongoing issue related to the Sydenham School and some of the approvals that Georgian College is waiting on. I'd like to bring that to people's attention and how that aligns with the requirements based on the Tenneco closure. So there's the piece there. Those are the three that I have just top of mind right now.
So how long do we have? Has the new council got opportunity?
The new council will also have an opportunity to weigh in on their first.
All right, so December 31st is when it's
deadline.
needed. And I'm sure there are other things will come up with the new council. Okay.
Do we want to pass a resolution?
If your ones are, we'll bring these ones forward to the new council and vote on it then.
Yeah, so, okay, that's the suggestion, that we don't need to be specific today, that notes are taken. Yes, Councillor Fosberg.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. So
Yeah.
it occurs to me that, it's come up before, progressively throughout the year, the term, as things arise, maybe we should be putting them on a, let's consider that for a delegation and at the next opportunity. Our lack of doing that, it's almost like we start from ground zero. So here, we don't even have a staff report. We've got 3 items thrown out, and we're all looking for the door. So what I would propose is that, perhaps we have a tracking mechanism whereby every time something comes up, it goes on a list. If it gets resolved, then we take it off. Additionally, there has been discussion about the lack of measurable tools available to us as a municipality with which to compare our effectiveness and efficiency. So when we talk about the Midas tools, last time it came up, well, you can't compare, it's not apples to apples. This is an example of one item that I think should get pushed up the pipeline to the province, because if we're not able to measure our success, then what are we doing? So if there's a way that the province can level the playing field with the data that they capture and our ability to say, we are truly efficient in roads, we are improving in efficiency in this category. Right now, we got nothing.
Councillor Fosberg, we're going to be having a meeting on November the 15th to discuss some goals and opportunities that moving forward. So I think we can look at that CEO meeting. So today, I thank you for that input. Is there any other comments on that? Okay. Councillor Burley?
Well, we need notice, is there any?
No, there is an opportunity here before that, but we'll recognize you maybe. Any notices of motion? We have to officialize this. Any notice of motion? I don't see any. Then next thing is adjournment, and that's Councillor Burley. I've held your vote in reserve there. Second, Councillor Bell. Burley and Bell. There. Always this. That's a dance. Burley and Bell. Yes. Yes. Do we want to do that after lunch or now?
I was watching the weather there a moment ago, was kind of, I think it's best if people have lunch and then you can put your coats on, we can go lay the wreath and then you can carry on.
Okay. Thank you for that. So, with that being said, we're adjourned for lunch. And please stay